And for your time. Like I was saying, I feel like right now, everyone is going through something on some level.
Yeah, I 100% agree. I have an odd perspective because for over a decade, I ran the largest drug treatment center in Las Vegas. And then during that time, I realized that all of the community was way more fragile than I realized. That, the most normal people in the world would end up coming in and seeking help. And and I realized that the illusion that everybody's doing great was truly an illusion. Although nowadays, um, with the clients we're seeing, there's so many clients in tears, overly anxious. There's such a huge spike in substance use disorders. We're approaching a mental health crisis here in Las Vegas. I wrote an op-ed last week saying with the rental moratorium ending on 3/31, there's tens of thousands of people who haven't been able to pay rent. And during this time, whether it's mental illness or whether it's a substance use problem, um, they're concerned, and there's going to be even a greater need for help in the coming month.
Yeah. In all your years, have you ever seen a time like this where just sort of collectively so many people are dealing with mental health issues, whether it's anxiety or serious depression or substance abuse?
No, I never seen anything like this. I do know in 2020, we had more overdoses in our country, in the history of the country. I know consumption numbers are dramatically higher, both for illicit substances as well as, just for alcohol. People have been using unsafe or improper coping mechanisms to help deal with this. And there's a price to pay for that.
Yeah. So, and that leads me right off to my next point, which is we just don't want to talk about, the problems which we've all addressed in some way or another the past 12 months or so, but really it's about, some of these solutions. And, some of it may be obviously having to go see professional help. We could get into that, but also I want to start with the basic stuff. What is it that people can do if they are worried about their mental health and maybe don't have access to a doctor, or maybe they don't feel comfortable in taking that step?
I do group therapy at Crossroads every week. And there's an exercise I often do when I tell myself that, I know when I drink beer, problems occur in my life. So I made a decision that I wasn't going to drink beer anymore. However, if I think, how am I never going to have a beer again? Not 4th of July, not, a Super Bowl or major events, that's impossible that I'm never drinking a cold beer again. Also, if I think about the past, the amount of times that I drank too much and caused problems, that causes shame. I'm embarrassed. I'm mad at myself. I'm sad. However, if I say to myself, for the next 5 minutes while I'm talking to Todd, I'm not going to drink a beer. You know what? That's totally doable. And I'm not anxious about having to do it the rest of my life. And I'm not mad about what I did in the past. And when I just live in the moment, right this second, I'm okay. So that's a mindful technique, which I like to start off by using to help kind of de-escalate kind of the crisis situation. As folks saying, how am I going to stay off meth or heroin? However, this is a dialectical behavioral therapy technique, which we use mindfulness, which we use becoming more aware of your senses, recognize your breathing. Right now, you and I, we're okay. It's when we can get overly concerned with the future or the past that we get into trouble. So using techniques, whether it's a song, you use music, where you just enjoy the music for a moment, listen to the words, really get into it, and let other things go away. using physical things like yoga. Uh, maybe, something I do as an older guy, just doing some stretching in the morning. And instead of worrying about my mortgage payment while I'm stretching, I just say, you know what, I'm going to be right here, right now. And I'm just going to kind of feel my back while I'm struggling to touch my toes. And I'm enjoying the experience of being right now. So, part of mindfulness is really being in the present.
And how do you control that for people who might hear this and think, I'm going to turn this one light down here a little bit. If that's for me, for people who hear that and say, well, it makes sense, but how do I do that when I can't stop these thoughts that are racing, whether because I'm concerned about my mortgage, my rent, or the health of a loved
one? Well, there's a technique that I use in meditation, which is sometimes those thoughts do come in. And it's okay to acknowledge and say, oh, wow, I'm thinking about this person. Well, right now, I wanted to focus on stretching. So I recognize that thought came in. I'm going to acknowledge it. Now I'm going to let it go. And I'm going to go back to doing this stretch. So we talk about awareness as one of the keys is just, recognize it. Feel your breathing. Recognize your breathing. Be aware of thoughts as they come in and be more mindful or conscious about letting those go. The second thing is acceptance. I'm worried how I'm going to pay my mortgage in 2 weeks. Yes, that's a concern. I'm not going to do anything about it right now because right now I'm doing a stretch. So I accept that as what the truth is, and I'm just going to focus on being in the present because actually being in the present is all we have. We're just here right now.
And so would that help people essentially lower the overall temperature of the pressure that they're feeling if they could just take, whether it's 5 minutes or 10 minutes or 20 minutes a day, and figure out how to sort of just not focus on their troubles?
Yes, especially if, during that time they're not using a substance like a drug, and they're not drinking alcohol. So you're not doing something negative, to your body and to your mind at that time. Whether it's meditating, sit in a chair, put your feet firmly on the ground, feel your breathing for a few minutes, recognize it. Just being present is certainly helpful. And if you're operating at a higher anxiety level, and you can have 20 minutes, 5 minutes where you're present at a lower anxiety level, that's certainly a healthy thing for us.
Yeah, I want to get into addiction next, but real quick before we get off of sort of meditation and then even sort of guided meditation, we see a lot of these apps that are out there being advertised, and you can name, whatever they are, but you see them and they're on TV. I'm curious, what do you and people in your industry think of these apps? Are they useful? Are these things that people should be looking into to possibly take advantage of?
I'm going to tell you personally, I am a fan of using some of those guided meditation apps, and I've used them on my phone as well as my laptop, and saying, I'm a little late for work this morning. I can't meditate for 30 minutes. I'm going to type in 6-minute meditation. Boom. I'm going to do 6 minutes, what I have. And it still helps. And it still helps me in my day. And I feel good about myself because I've been mindful about making a commitment to meditate. And I still got some time to appreciate, the human experience, the spiritual experience we're going through, and take a pause and let some of that stress go of, I've got a son who isn't doing everything that I want, at the time. And I, I'm going to spend some time to be okay, with the universe as it is right now.
And now onto that, that other topic that, we've been talking about really, and about to increase the substance abuse, no matter what it is, alcohol, drugs, prescription drugs, or uncontrolled substances. It is such a trap, right? And that's a problem we all can fall into, whether it's alcohol or prescription drugs, is that there's an immediate release of anxiety that you could feel when you have a glass of wine.
Yeah, I have since I'm a licensed alcohol and drug counselor supervisor, I have a bit of a skewed view on it. And I really ask people, about 9% of the population has a substance use disorder. So to me, there's sort of two different groups. If you're a person who's an alcoholic or a person who has a substance use disorder, to me, you should either be getting help or you should be refraining. And then there's the 90% of people who don't have an issue with it. And, to me, that they should be enjoying it, doing it responsibly, certainly not using a motor vehicle or using a firearm when you're impaired, making sure you're still tending to your work and your family and your social and your physical, needs and responsibilities. So there's two groups. And I don't, if you go home after work and have a glass of wine, as far as I'm concerned, more power to you. I am a person with a proclivity to compulsivity. And I've learned that sometimes when I go have a glass of wine, things that I can't control and didn't want to happen occur. So I've learned that I'm not the kind of person who could have a glass of wine.
What about for people who are now, we're sort of getting out of this a little bit, so maybe it might be a little outdated, but as things are opening up and people are returning more towards work in the next couple of weeks and months, and Sisolak's actually talking tonight, so at 5, so we'll see what he has to say about reopening and such. But if you're at home more often and you're maybe consuming more alcohol or prescription drugs, how do you know if you're like now flirting into sort of problem territory? How do you sort of define that for yourself?
I use a 2-part test. Do you compulsively use despite negative consequences? So if you find that, you've been having 4 glasses of wine at night, and sometimes you don't log on to your Zoom meetings or you don't go to work, and you're getting in trouble at work, well, now I notice a negative consequence. Now, when you sat down, did you say I was going to only have 2, but you end up having 4? Well, then it sounds like you were compulsively using despite negative consequences. And to me, that's a broad test that any person could ask themselves if they could be honest with themselves.
Yeah, that's the whole key, right? You got to be honest with yourself, because we hear about these issues of shame and whatnot that sometimes people, that's why we can't be honest with ourselves. What else is out there that I'm unaware of? What else do you want to talk about in areas that you want to cover here for this?
Well, happy St. Patrick's Day.
Happy St. Patrick's Day.
I will say that there's a lot of communication about opiate use and fentanyl use, which is certainly on the rise and a concern. Methamphetamine use is still very high in the Valley. It's probably the #1 drug for folks coming into our facilities right now. So, there's no good reason for a person to be using methamphetamines. And if you are and you want help, I'm grateful that there's multiple places to come 24/7 to get help. But I'll also mention that when you say prescription drugs, there's a whole class of drugs called benzodiazepines. Drugs like, Xanax or Soma or Ativan, Valium. We're seeing increases in the amount of folks. We did a recent sample at the lab, and 20% of the people who were having blood work done tested positive for benzodiazepines. And these are a highly addictive substance with dependence forming in 3 to 14 days of daily use. So I would just be aware of it. If you are on your next appointment with your doctor, talk to your doctor about it and say, how could I do a safe taper, or how could I detox, or how could I separate from a substance that's potentially harmful for me?
Yeah, it's great. Great conversation, and I appreciate your time. And I was saying, really, as I look back, just being in the news business, I can't remember a time where there's such universal anxiety, depression, and fear, really, since probably maybe post 9/11, really.
Yeah. 9/11 was one isolated event that happened on one day. And to me, I noticed the country pull together, and we were unified as a country, at the time. Now we have this bifurcated country compounded with a prolonged event with just about all of us have lost a loved one or somebody we care about to this terrible virus. So I believe this is a more acute, more serious issue for the mental health of all of us. So I'm glad you asked some questions and call some attention to it. I'll remind you that Crossroads is open 24/7. We love helping people. Call or come down anytime, please.
Yeah, and you guys, primarily focus on addiction issues, and but someone else who doesn't. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
We're co-occurring certified, so we do treat, and we have folks who come in who are not using drugs, who are just having a mental health crisis. So with a psychiatrist, with 24-hour nursing, doctors, techs, we are able to help people with both mental health as well as substance use. Although our focus, you're right, it's clearly helping people with substance use disorders.
And that leads me to one last question: is recognizing some of these signs in yourself, because most people who may not during normal times really have these elevated levels of anxiety, depression, or whatever. How do you recognize that you may be having mental health issues? How do you? I guess right. So that's the best way to ask that, right? Is how do you recognize if you are having mental health issues that need to be addressed?
Well, and this is the sad truth, is that almost always we are the last ones to find out. So when I finally gave up and said, I need to address my alcoholism, I thought it was a secret and no one knew. Meanwhile, every person in my life knew that I had a problem with alcohol. I was the last one to find out. It's very similar with psychiatric issues, because our brain, through denial, through kind of self-protection mechanisms, tells us that we're okay, we're normal. So most often you have to talk to a loved one, you have to talk to a trusted friend, you should talk to your counselor or your doctor and describe your feelings, your senses, your symptoms. And you need to be open to that feedback, because the denial that builds up naturally is a defense mechanism. And
yeah, but
I demanded I didn't have mental illness. I don't have a substance use disorder.
Yeah, I mean, it's that denial. There's also that sense of oh, I'm a tough person. I could handle it. I'll just sort of get through it. Right? We should do that. Right?
I told people I was a functioning alcoholic. I like to drink a case of beer. Thought it was the normalest thing in the world. When I said that in a group of people and I tried to convince myself of it, I just looked at all their faces and I recognized that I sounded like a crazy person. So if I talked to just you, I would convince you that my problem was my job and the problem was my wife. However, when I talk with a group of people and I explain my behaviors, my reactions, my thoughts, my use, and without even giving me any verbal feedback, I just look in their eyes and I could tell that I actually don't drink like a normal person, or I don't have thoughts or behaviors as a normal person. So group activities are also really beneficial for helping us break down that denial.
Yeah, and I think that's the hard part for everyone, is how do you have that initial conversation when there's so much fear, sort of anxiety and shame that is still wrapped around this idea of mental awareness and mental health, in the sense of being a weak person.
Yeah, and it's not weak at all. If I got cancer, you wouldn't think of me as weak. If I developed some heart disease or hypertension, you wouldn't think of me as weak. The fact that I developed a substance use disorder, now, if I didn't address it, you're right. You'd look at me as sad or weak. However, there's counselors all over the valley. Nowadays, you could even do them by Zoom. Really, the answer is, if you're wondering, most people aren't wondering if they're an alcoholic. If you're wondering if you're an alcoholic, or you're wondering if you have mental health symptoms, call and get an assessment. Use your insurance, access and talk to a mental health professional and just say, I want to do a 1 hour bio, psych, and social. I want to do a 1 hour assessment to rule out a mental health disorder or rule out substance abuse. and then just have a HIPAA protected conversation with a licensed professional, and have that person help make a treatment plan to help you have a better quality of life.